Hi, I'm David Bader, and I direct the Institute for Data Science at New Jersey Institute of Technology. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Francine Berman. She is the Edward P. Hamilton Distinguished Professor of Computer Science at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. She's a data scientist whose current work focuses on the social and environmental impacts of information technology, and in particular, the Internet of Things, a deeply interconnected ecosystem of billions of devices and systems that are transforming commerce, science, and society. Her interests are in the broad area of public interest technology, with a focus on strategies that promote technology as a tool to advance humanity. She's a faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University, and was selected as the 2019-2020 Catherine Hampson Bessel Fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University. Dr. Berman was the inaugural recipient of the ACM IEEE Computer Society Ken Kennedy Award for influential leadership in the design, development, and deployment of nation-scale cyber infrastructure. In 2015, she was nominated by President Obama and confirmed by the US Senate to become a member of the National Council on the Humanities. In 2019, she was elected to membership in the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and this year she was elected as a fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration. Earlier this year, she was also announced as the recipient of the Paul Evan Peters Award, which recognizes notable lasting achievements in the creation and innovative use of network-based information resources and services that advance scholarship and intellectual productivity. Dr. Berman is the founder of the Research Data Alliance, previously served as RPI's Vice President for Research and Director of the San Diego Supercomputer Center. She's a fellow of the ACM, the IEEE, and AAAS, and currently serves as a member of the Board of Trustees of the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation and the National Council on the Humanities. Dr. Berman has previously served as chair of the Board of Trustees of the Anita Borg Institute for Women in Technology and as co-chair of the National Academy's Board on Research, Data, and Information, as a co-chair of the Blue Ribbon Task Force on Sustainable Digital Preservation and Access, as a co-chair of the National Science Foundation Advisory Committee for SIZE, and as chair of the Information Computing and Communications section of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. For her accomplishments, Dr. Berman has been recognized by the Library of Congress as a digital preservation pioneer and as one of the top women in technology by Business Week and Newsweek, and as one of the top technologists by IEEE Spectrum. We're very pleased to have her here today as our Data Science Seminar Series speaker, and I encourage you to interact, ask questions through the chat, and we are looking forward to a great talk on the Internet of Things, Utopia or Dystopia. Fran?
Thanks so much, David. I'm going to share my screen. Before I start, I just wanted to acknowledge how pleased I am with David and NJIT and the Data Science seminar series. I really feel very honored to be asked, but I also feel like this is so important for all of us to be able to stay in touch. And for all of you who are listening, I just wanted to let you know that we are in unprecedented times, and I wish you the best and hope that all is well. Part of the reason we're here is because we are here in cyberspace. And so courtesy of the field that we all work in. So I wanted to talk a little bit about where we are at and what we're doing. So one of the things that I think all of us have found in the pandemic is that cyberspace indeed has become critical infrastructure. And it was pretty important before, but things were an option. You could buy an Alexa or not. You could use a Fitbit or not. You could use a connected implantable device or not. You could buy a smartphone or not. But these days, it's very difficult to go to school. without going on Zoom. And this is my class right here at a lecture that I just gave about a month ago. And that is the way that I teach my classes these days. Instacart delivers my groceries. I continue my ballet lessons online. So this is an actual picture of my ballet studio. This is what the teacher sees. I'm one of those little boxes, probably the klutziest one there. And this is what I see is the teacher and a demonstration dancer that enables me to be able to take ballet in my living room. So if there's anything that's critical infrastructure, it's the internet. And it allows us to do these days all kinds of things that we did on site or we did optionally otherwise. Now, one of the things we should recognize is the cyberspace that we're using is now, change the slide, Fran, is now more capable, more autonomous, and more intrusive than ever before. And that cyberspace is driven by the Internet of Things. So whether we all know it or not, we're all part of the Internet of Things. A useful definition of the IoT or the Internet of Things is that it's a deeply interconnected ecosystem of sensors and cameras, devices, computers, etc. And they share data. They work together to make decisions, and they often operate autonomously in the background. And so information is being collected, it's being shared, it's being processed, and it's being used to provide me goods or services, benefits and risks, perhaps without my knowing it. Now, I think there will be no argument out there that the IoT is a really powerful tool. And, ideally, it should empower people through technology and technology through intelligence. And we see all kinds of outcomes of that, consequences of that. We see much more autonomous decision-making. We see all kinds of optimization and customization and personalization and efficiency. And some of that benefits us a great deal. And some of us puts us a bit at risk. We see considerably more surveillance and monitoring. And these days, technologies are going towards smart technologies, smart grids, smart farms, smart operating rooms, et cetera. And so the IoT is powerful, moreover, it's unavoidable. So these days, the IoT is becoming more ubiquitous, it's more unavoidable. Some of these statistics are these days quite conservative. A few years ago, Gartner said that there would be over 20 billion things in the IoT. There are likely considerably more. Global video surveillance is expected to reach 63 billion, that's billion with a B, mid-decade. We expect almost all vehicles to be self-driving by 2050. And the Internet of Things will have an economic impact in the trillions of dollars by the next few years. And so we are really at the tip of the iceberg of the IoT. And a really good question is, where will it go and what is our role in it? So first of all, let me point out that the IoT has a tremendous number of benefits. And, if you've ever had robotic surgery, whether the surgeon is in the operating room with you or whether the surgeon is many miles away, many of these machines can do things at a level of precision that as humans we can only dream of, and guided by surgeons can do things that are quite important and minimally intrusive. If you have thought about robots as in manufacturing plants and all kinds of other things, know that the military is thinking about robots that can help in a disaster. So they can go in a toxic environment and, for example, save someone who needs it. If you had an avocado this week, and they're still good this time of year, it may have been that your avocado was grown on a smart farm where we can monitor plants at the precision of a single plant and look at the needs for water and fertilizer and nitrogen so farmers can optimize their yield. So all of these are sort of wonderful, wonderful benefits of the IoT. But the IoT also has risks. And so, if you read the paper regularly, you hear about those risks. There have been a number of risks where people have hacked baby monitors, they've yelled at babies, they've threatened parents, they've done all of that other stuff. There have been crashes of self-driving cars. Alexa recorded a private conversation and sent it to someone. There have been cyber vulnerabilities, security problems with connected pacemakers that could have killed people but didn't. There's a continuing national discussion about facial recognition and about contact tracing and about all of the other ways that these IoT technologies can intrude in our lives. And so, you know, which is it? Is the IoT a future utopia or is it a future dystopia? And, you know, the answer is really it's up to us. It's a little of both. And there are ways in which we can guide the IoT to be more beneficial to society. And there's a way in which we can, in some sense, guide without meaning to the IoT towards being less beneficial to society. So today I want to talk about how complicated that really is, because no one wants society to be a dystopia, but actually making sure it's a utopia, and neither of these are achievable extremes, by the way, is really, really difficult. And I want to give some examples of what that actually means. So first of all, it might benefit all of us to know that we have been here before. So it is generally the case that you have a technology that's disruptive and a new advance, that it takes a while for the rest of the social environment to catch up with it, for there to be a social framework and ethical guidelines. And we only need to look at the Industrial Revolution to know that. When you looked at the Industrial Revolution and you saw the great advances in chemical manufacturing and iron production and textiles, you saw urbanization, you saw the rise of factories. Those were great technological advances, but because of those technological advances, you also saw greater pollution, greater exploitation of children, and all of those things. And it was the first time that or one of the primary times that we really started looking at child labor laws and environmental laws and things like that. And so, you know, we're in the same place now. The IoT is racing ahead with all kinds of cool innovations. We can collect data on anything. We can mine the heck out of it. We have AI, it can make decisions for us. And if we want it to really advance society, rather than having people advance that technology by being products and input, then we need to do something, you know, explicit. So one of the things we ought to think about is when we think about an IoT utopia, what are our measures of success, right? You know, how do I know when I get there? And let me give you two measures of success that, that make sense to me and might make sense to many of you. First of all, you know, we live on planet Earth. Without planet Earth, there's no us. So the IoT and its devices ought to be good for the environment. And so what do we mean by that? Because that's easy to say. It should promote sustainability. It should minimize e-waste. And it should avoid depletion of rare materials that are important to the Earth. And so those are three of many criteria we could come up with. If we think about if we make the Earth okay, we want to make sure we're okay. So all of these IoT devices should be good for society. And you know, what might that mean? And that might mean we are relatively safe and secure from them, that they protect our privacy, that they maximize their benefits and minimize their risk to us. And so again, those are sort of three of many characteristics we might add. So what I'd like to do is think about that a little and with you. And the first question we might ask is, okay, if those are our success measures, whose responsibility is it to help the IoT move in that direction? And what I'd like to do is sort of demonstrate through the rest of the talk that it's kind of everybody's responsibility. We can't just say it's the government's job alone and say, okay, you guys do it, guys being a generic term. We can't just say that it's business's responsibility and point to Silicon Valley and say, you guys fix the problem. We can't fix the problem all by ourselves. And academics, which actually have a role to play here, can't fix the problem either. So we actually need a coordinated strategy of lots of different things. We do need the government for policy and legislation that are public focused. We do need business for responsible design and transparency. We do need the public to promote safe use and practice. And we do need academia to really think about new innovations and new ways of looking at the kinds of innovations we might find in the IoT in a helpful manner. So what I thought I would do is start out with, first of all, since we're a data science seminar, think about what the data challenges might be, because as our community begins to work on the problems, there are a ton of interesting problems. There's for those of you looking for thesis problems and research problems and stuff like that, you need to look no further than the IoT, and there's problems of all kinds. How do we assess, how do we collect and assess the data needed for safety and security and privacy and sustainability for IoT products? What kind of data do we need for IoT systems? How long do we need to keep it? Who needs to keep it? What are the rights? If you're interested in legal kinds of issues, what information is needed to assign responsibility and determine ethical outcomes and ensure protections? Who's responsible and who's accountable? How do we make sure that our algorithms are transparent and open and fair? How do we even do research in a dynamic environment where some of the information is proprietary and it's hard to do any kind of controlled experiments? So these are all real academic problems for our community. But we're not the only community involved in the IoT. So let's do a worked example for most of the rest of this talk about how hard it is to build a beneficial IoT device. And we need to look no farther than those poor vehicles who, for many of us, wish they were driven more these days to get to work and to go to the airport and to do a lot of other things, but are still being driven quite a bit. So let's think about how we might work towards a beneficial IoT by looking at connected autonomous vehicles. Self-driving cars is a case study. This is a Waymo car. You'll notice it looks like a car with a lot of extra stuff on top, and that extra stuff is very important for its self-driving capabilities. So first of all, to level set for us all, let's just think just very briefly about how a self-driving car works. In a self-driving car or an autonomous vehicle that is connected, so a connected autonomous vehicle, is basically a car with some extra components that see and then extra components that do. Those are computers that model and analyze, and there'll be some actuators there as well. And a self-driving car drives exactly the way you and I drive. It senses what the environment's like, it plans what it's going to do next, and it acts. And it does that all in a split second, just like we do, because that's the way you have to drive. So things that it needs to know is, where is it? They have to use positional and other kinds of information. How do you get there? And how do you actually drive? And the Society of Automotive Engineers have actually ranked cars in terms of how much self-driving capabilities they have. So at the bottom is level 0 and 1. And level 0 and 1 are, anything from the Model T to a car you buy that doesn't have any kinds of good systems at all. It's all human driven. There's very little that's done autonomously. Most of us drive like level 1, level 2 cars. Well, those of us that don't have fancy cars drive. Those of us who have old non-fancy cars, that would be me, have level 1, level 2 cars. And that's a car where there are systems. I have anti-lock brakes on my 2014 Subaru. I have cruise control, and I have other kinds of systems, but it can't do any of the driving itself. It needs me to do all of that. My friend Alyssa, I'll show you a picture of her car later, has a fancy Tesla. That Tesla can do a lot of stuff on its own, but it still needs a human. So she has to be able to take over. It can't do everything in every environment, and it's commercially available. So her car is like a level 3. These days, the car manufacturers and software companies are building level 4 cars for services. For us, self-driving car services, those are the ones you see with Uber, and Waymo is building them, and those are typically level 4, which means that the car can do a lot of stuff by itself, but it can't do everything. And level 5 is still mythical. There are no cars that can do everything all the time without humans, that are basically, completely autonomous. Okay, so that's where we are. Fran in her little, level 1, 2 car, well, probably level 1. Alyssa in her level 3 car. I'm not sure what David drives or what you all drive, but my guess is level 3 would be an aspiration. And, so how do these cars work? And it's fascinating for us to sort of look at the engineering of how these cars see. So it turns out that they have a number of different kinds of systems that see. They use light detection, they use radio wave mapping, they use sound, they use positioning and inertial information. And so why do they have all of these systems? And it turns out that each of these systems has different errors, different ranges, different strengths, and different weaknesses. So the union of all of the systems allows us some fault tolerance in terms of how the car senses its environment and is able to provide useful data to the computers that model it. So it's really quite an amazing engineering feat to even create a car to get the data to the computers. Then the computers themselves are pretty amazing. So this little video is from Chris Urmson's TED Talk, which I encourage you to watch. And this shows what the computer with all of this data actually has to deal with. So the car has to figure out appropriate navigational paths, what are obstacles and what are not obstacles, what does signs say, where is there construction, where are there other cars, are the other cars doing something unexpected? Is that person a pedestrian or who will move, or a police person who is guiding traffic? Where's the construction? Where's the bicycle? What happens if a random chicken crosses the road? And all of those things have to be part of the model. Now, right now, this is about 100 million lines of code for the average self-driving car. And in comparison, I think it's the Boeing Dreamliner that has about 6.5 million lines of code. So it's actually harder to build an algorithm for a self-driving car than it is for a self-driving airplane, because your interactions with the environment are many greater, with other cars, with other kinds of things, et cetera. It's not as if airplanes don't have interactions, but they're many greater in terms of self-driving cars. So this gives you a sense about what a technological miracle even a self-driving car that doesn't work very well is, not to mention a self-driving car that ultimately, hopefully, will work well in all situations. Okay, so, how prevalent are they today? And Forbes made the prediction that that by 2020, there will be $10 million that are level 3 and above self-driving cars. In 2017, there were more than 1.4 billion cars on the road. That tells you that, and these are not completely comparable, but that tells you we're basically, a 1% or under of cars that can really do things with any degree of capability. In 2017, Americans drove over 3 trillion miles. Waymo's self-driving car, and Waymo has the most miles logged, has been driven over 8 million miles in 2018. There's some more now, but you can see it's just a tiny, tiny fraction of cars that really are driving with this kind of capability. The expectation is over the next decade, a small fraction of our cars will be completely self-driving, or not completely self-driving, but as self-driving as we can get. By the 2050s, we actually expect all new cars that you can buy to be self-driving. And so life is going to change tremendously over the next 30 years. And it's not just the cars. So let's see some of the other impacts. Well, actually, let's get to our success measures, because you might find this interesting. So one thing you might ask yourself, success measure number 1, is our level 3 to 4 cars good for the environment? That's what we've got now. And it turns out that for many of these cars, the answer is not yet. Because remember, these are probably battery electric cars. And then they've got a whole bunch of junk on them, right? They've got computers and they've got cameras and they've got sensors. So they're heavier and they're less aerodynamic. and there's lower efficiency of these cars. So you're actually adding things that make them more, more of a drag on the environment. On the other hand, because these cars are eco-driving, they're more smoothly accelerating, decelerating, they're braking more smoothly, they're platooning some of them, you can expect some savings. So if it's just the kind of cars we have today, you can expect there to be a net benefit and ultimately to become more good for the environment than today's standard electric car that doesn't have self-driving capabilities. But this is not what cars are going to look like in 2050. And cars in 2050 are more likely going to look like the old Jetsons cartoon pod than they are looking like anything today. And the reason is that, as we develop these cars, they're going to be right-sized. If there's just one or two people in the car, you're going to find something that maybe looks more golf cartish. They're going to be maybe a larger pod. People can have a meeting or watch a movie or go to sleep. They'll be platooning. They'll be using eco-driving as a matter of course. They'll be driving closer together and at higher speeds. They'll be lighter. They'll be all algorithmic, so you'll get congestion mitigation. And so in 2050, transportation is going to look really different. And it's going to be really different for us. I may not own a car in 2050. Well, hopefully I'll be around in 2050, but you may not own a car in 2050. You may just call up a service, just like anything else. It'll just be the transportation service. You say, I need a car in a minute. There's a car there. It drives, it gets you, it drops you off. When you need it again, you get a different car. Or perhaps, I want to go visit David in Manhattan or NJIT and see the rest of you when we come out of the pandemic. I just order up a car. I'm there in less than an hour because it's going faster and it's platooning. These are the kinds of things that will really change our lifestyles as well as changing transportation. And there'll be more. They'll change our cities. They'll change our economy. They'll change the way we use land. So in terms of, what if I worked at New Jersey and I lived, up in Troy, New York? If I had a self-driving car, it wouldn't take me long to get to work. Will we need law enforcement anymore? Because everything will be algorithmic, so we'll use police in a different way. The insurance and liability we might have for these cars are less. The ownership versus service issues will be less. Land use is a particularly interesting thing because if you think about most urban environments, there's about 30% of that room is used for parking. That's parking on the street, parking above ground, parking below ground. Those of you close to Manhattan are not unfamiliar with this site, which is this kind of multi-level parking lot where you can leave your car here and then you come get it. And, there's a set of protocols by which you get your car. When you have self-driving cars, do you even need parking anymore? When I don't use my car, maybe it goes off somewhere else to park that's very far from my home, or maybe it's a service, and so it just goes picks somebody else up. What kind of jobs will there be? Will your car jobs be more like a rental service, where people have to come in and clean the car every once in a while because people have been riding it? Or maybe now there's a car monitor with a surveillance camera in the car to make sure I'm not doing something illegal inside the car because there's no driver to monitor me. So if you think about how it really changes the social and environmental ecosystem that we all live in, it is going to have dramatic effects. And it's not the only IoT device, but it gives you a real sense about how much lives will change between now and 2050, just because a car can do some driving by itself. So let's look at success measure 2. And a reasonable question for us to look at in terms of social advancement is, are self-driving cars good for you? And 3 questions I might want to ask about that are they safe? Do I trust them? Do they protect my privacy? And you notice this car doesn't even have a steering wheel because cars won't need steering wheels because we won't be driving them. They'll be driving themselves. Who needs a steering wheel? And so, let's go to the first question, safety. And that's a reasonable question to ask. So you know, when I ask if a self-driving car is safe, what can go wrong? And, you know, first of all, there's a ton of things, you know, and we all have computers, we know this is true, that don't work as expected. So maybe all of the sensors are not working in a particular environment. Maybe this, you know, maybe lightning in this thunderstorm that we just had hit something, or the weather conditions are such that the cameras can't see, or sensors go out, or there's some sort of problem. Maybe there is a security vulnerability. This article, which was highly publicized, was when, you know, white hat hackers demonstrated to a journalist by running him off a highway that they could actually hack his car from hundreds of miles away. If they had been meaning to do ill, you could imagine this being an incredible problem. And the problem was that the connection of the entertainment system really provided a security vulnerability to the actual operational part of the car. There are many unanticipated situations you can get into. So there's lots of things that can go wrong in a self-driving car, as in other systems that we use. Your risk of dying in a car crash over a lifetime is 1 in 102. You may think that's big, but I think your risk of, you know, dying in a gunshot or by a heart attack is actually more, so not so bad. But your risk of dying in a plane crash over a lifetime is 1 in 205,000. And of course, that doesn't include COVID, so hopefully that doesn't go up too much. But the question is, you know, what do we think is safe enough? Now, you might just ask, well, I just want to know if a self-driving car is safer than a human-driven vehicle. So, like, how do I figure that out? First of all, I have to ask you, what do you mean by safe? And so there's lots of different ways we measure safety. We sometimes measure safety as fatalities. We can measure it as serious injuries or crashes, or times when I did something that was illegal but nobody got hurt. Or times I had to put my hands on the steering wheel of a car that's trying to drive because it's obviously doing something it shouldn't. And it turns out that if I limit my question, and we're all scientists here, or many of us are scientists, right? If I limit my question to something I can actually compute apples to apples data for, I might want to say, well, over a certain time period, what's the ratio of fatalities to vehicle miles traveled in a self-driving car versus fatalities to vehicle miles traveled in a human-driven car? We actually know that. So the fatalities in human-driven cars over a certain time period is 1 and 18 and 1/100th of a person over 100 million miles. We know of, or at least I know of, and Wikipedia knows of, 5 fatal self-driving car crashes. Many of them were in Teslas, but of course, these are things that are commercially available versus some of the other cars. And so you'd say, okay, that gets me part of the way there. So I know the fatalities of human-driven cars. I know the numerator for self-driving cars, but I don't know the denominator. So it turns out that only California expects people to report the vehicle miles traveled in these public road experimental self-driving car runs. So we actually have no idea what the denominator is. If it's 5 over 10, that's not good. Is it 5 over something that would make the human-driven car ratio that would be better? But the real question is how many fatalities are going to make me feel safe enough? And in a completely unscientific question, I often ask my class, how many accidents do self-driving cars have to have before you feel comfortable driving in one? And for many of them, the answer is 0. And so, our notion of trust for self-driving cars may need to get closer to airplanes than currently in cars. And that will just depend on many, many social things. Okay. Another question I can ask is the privacy of a self-driving car. Here is my actual non-self-driving car, looking very spiffy in my friend Shelley's driveway. And this is my friend Alyssa's car, who actually put the entertainment system on for the purposes of this picture. Thank you very much. We were not driving. I just want to point this out. And if you think about the data that my car collects, it's not zero. It collects a lot of technical data. It collects very little personal data, really, comparatively. And it collects, not much societal and crowdsourced data. But if you look at Alyssa's car, it collects all that stuff, not just the expected stuff, where you go, where you are, how you drive. It has a microphone. It collects what you're doing and saying. It might collect, for those of you who have that little insurance plug-in, how much alcohol you consume, or what you listen to, or what the content of your texts are, or your messages, or what you look up on the internet. And because we have very few national consumer privacy laws, and most of those are focused on health or children or other kinds of credit or other kinds of things, there is nothing that protects that data from any use the car manufacturer wants. We've signed up some terms and conditions, and most of those say things like, we can give it to our partners or use it for, experimental purposes, and you don't really know specifically what it's for. And so, basically Elon Musk has Alyssa's data and can use it for anything that he finds useful or profitable or whatever. And so, if Alyssa and I wanted to plan a crime, which we don't want to do, just saying, we would be better off doing it in my car than her car, because that information is not private in her car, whereas that information is not even being collected. Well, probably is by our phones, but other than that, it's not being collected in my car, by the car. So, what are the implications for us as data scientists? And it turns out there's a million challenges and repercussions. There are privacy implications. What is an appropriate set of information that can be gathered? Who can retain it, and how do they retain it, and who has rights and access to it? Who has control over that? And jurisdictions count. In California, you can collect and retain much less data now because of the California Consumer Privacy Act than you can in other jurisdictions in the country. In Europe, you can collect and retain much less private information because of the General Data Protection Regulation. So here's where laws and regulation and policy counts. There are data stewardship and preservation implications. Where should self-driving car and other IoT data be hosted, and how long it should be retained? And what are reasonable expectations for curation or metadata or interoperability or workflows or security or any of this? And then, of course, there are research implications in terms of how we do reproducible and justifiable and open science research on the IoT. How do we research the AI systems that are becoming more and more prevalent? What do we think about things like ethics, and how, when and how and where do they enter into it? So, this is like not easy button stuff. This is hard button stuff. And it's stuff that should be being done in academia and the government, as well as in the private sector. So, at the end of it all, if you think about the universe of impacts of the IoT, and in particular of self-driving cars, it impacts a whole lot of stuff. It certainly impacts us, humans, and us as a group, society. It impacts the physical world, the natural ecosystem, what materials we use and what we do with them, the built environment, how we configure ourselves in order to take advantage of these devices. And the cyber world, how do we design and plan responsible hardware and software and data? What kinds of systems and mechanisms do we want to put in place that create the checks and balances that we need? And all of those are super interesting problems, and we have to work on all of them at the same time. So, and we don't just have to work on them for cars, we have to work on them for pacemakers and refrigerators and smart grids and Fitbits and Alexas and, Instacart APIs and all of the kinds of things that, that we have to work on. Now, how are we going to work on that? Because, it's not good enough to say this is hard. You have to say, what are you going to do about it? And it turns out that there's lots of little dials we can try to start turning. If we're planning on developing cars, you want to turn emissions to, and that's emissions in creating the car as well as the battery charge we might have in an electric car. You want to turn that to low rather than high. You want the number of accidents to be low rather than high, and you want the severity of accidents also to be low rather than high. It changes the way we think about economy, because in 30 years, if cars are primarily a service rather than things that we own, that's really going to change insurance, that's going to change law, that's going to change mechanics, that's going to change the whole automotive industry and more. It changes the way we think about privacy, and we have to put controls in place or accept that things are not private. It changes the way we use materials and the way we create security systems and the way we do e-waste. It changes our notion of what appropriate ethics are with respect to these devices. And when they make decisions for themselves, what kind of decisions do we want them to make? And when we guide them, what ethical systems are we going to do? And so there's lots of places we can work on them. If you're a lawyer, you can work on some things. If you're a data scientist, you can work on other things, et cetera. And the question is, like, who's going to work on all this stuff? And so, it turns out that, there's going to be, we just can't make any one group do it. If we just say, okay, Washington's going to solve this problem, Washington needs to understand what the technological possibilities are. And by the way, many people don't have a lot of trust in Washington to be doing things in the public interest right now. So, are we just going to let it be a free-for-all? The private sector has a lot of knowledge about this, and there are many people, friends of all of ours, who work in the private sector, but companies don't stay in business if they don't make a profit. So asking the fox to design and build protections for the hen house is really a non-starter. And then, I think as instructors and students and citizens in our society, it's up to all of us. And these sort of wonderful younger people, some of whom are related to me, all of whom are on their cell phone, I think, to me, hold a lot of inspiration for people who are going to really help us as part of the coordinated focus we have on this. It's like they're buying devices. We're all buying devices, and we can all ask questions about those devices, and we can all think about how our own feelings about the role of technology can happen in our own professions. Okay, so let me just give you 3 or 4 suggestions for how I think this might all work, and then I'm happy to take questions. So if I want to promote the public good via the IoT, how can my government help? And in our Constitution, the preamble of our Constitution, it charges the public sector with promoting the public good. So it's a really important thing for the public sector to be doing. And what they need to do, as we all feel, is that we need to create a set of laws and regulations and policies, et cetera, that kind of put safety controls on the IoT. So if you go to Disneyland and you're too short or you're too something, you don't get to ride on the roller coaster. And we need the equivalence of those kinds of laws. You have to be this tall to ride the IoT. What that means is we need guidelines for ethical development, we need protections, we need clarity about responsibility and liability, we need regulation for the public interest. There are a number of bills right now for consumer rights. They're stuck in committee. They haven't moved anywhere, and I think it's really important for us as the public to expect that and encourage our lawmakers to really put things into place. Businesses are a tremendously important part of this. They need not just profitable design and efficient design, but responsible design, and that means public-focused design. And as we all know, we can architect for any number of priorities. I think our products should be architected for safety and security and privacy protections. They should be environmentally focused. That means they should have longer lifespans. We can upgrade in software rather than hardware. We don't need to use disposable batteries. We can use rechargeable batteries. We can develop more sustainable supply chains, et cetera. And we can be transparent about the risks and benefits, because everything has risks and benefits. And so we want to be on the benefit side and not on the risk side. As academics, we can help. And I do think it's really important for all of us involved in the university to really be helping both our students and the general public understand what's at stake. So we want technology to work for us. We don't want to be working for technology. And to do that, it's really important for people to be thoughtful about making decisions about what they're interested in based on the benefits and liabilities of technology. And that means we need courses in public interest technology and how technology might be used in various ways. And we need all the other academic stuff. We need research and publication venues and practicum and professional options and internships. In fact, I was talking to someone from the ACLU today about what the ACLU is doing to involve technologists in some of the policy that they're doing. And these are things that we all can be doing if this is our interest. And finally, I think for all of us as citizens and consumers, we can help. You know, we can ask before we buy. We can make good choices. We can look at the privacy policies of our the products that we buy and buy something that's merely bad instead of horrible. We can protect our data. We can set our privacy parameters to max. We can use two-phase authentication. And, you know, this is an election season. And I do think that it's really important for us to use a technology lens as one of the many lenses we use when we think about voting. You know, we're voting for people who are going to make decisions about how technology is used. It's really important for you to know how your candidates of choice stand on that. And so I encourage all of you to vote, but I encourage all of you to sort of figure out what the technology thoughts about your favorite candidates are. It's typically not the thing they're talking about the most, but it's really important because they're going to have to make really key decisions. I want to thank the internet for all of the information in these pictures, which is the responsible thing to do. So thank you very much, internet. And I also want to thank NJIT for inviting me. And I worked with some great Harvard students, great Harvard undergrads last year, Amelia Cabrera, Wasim Marakshi, and Ali Jabari, who helped me as I thought through a lot of these issues. So I'd like to thank them as well. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions if we have time.
Thank you, Fran. That was a wonderful talk, and it really illuminated a lot of the many facets of the Internet of Things and all of the different policy, environmental, and computing and data science technologies and aspects that have to come together. So if folks want to unmute or turn on their cameras and ask questions, that would be great. Maybe I can start with a question. And that would be, as we have many young people in the audience, what would you tell a young person today really interested in data science, how to get involved with these types of very important problems of public interest?
I would say to start with your interests. And because I think there's a lot of places that to engage. So if you're a law student and you're really interested in these things, you know, learn something about technology. I have done a lot of work myself in terms of stewardship and preservation, and there's a lot of issues about that. You may be interested in social media. There's a ton of issues about where, you know, like how social media is used, what misinformation is, you know, is it a filter bubble or an echo chamber that's going to kind of take you down some space that really reduces your options for thinking broadly and thinking creatively. So I think you get to start with, you know, where you live And then the question is, how does prevailing society and the public interest and the IoT really enter in on that? And can you use your expertise to help?
Thank you. So we have a question from Jatin Kashyap, one of our folks in mechanical engineering at NJIT, who asks or says, very excited topic and a great talk, Dr. Berman. You look bullish on penetration of IoT in transportation sector in the near future. What do you think about the future of IoT in biological domains, for instance, brain-computer interface? So far, it appears people are very critical about it, even more than autonomous vehicles. So my question is, what future outlook do you have for brain-computer interfaces? And if you're positive, then what timeline do you have in mind? Thank you very much for the talk.
Thank you so much. I was trying to read it in the chat as I was talking, so this is a much better way to do it. And I have to say the question asker probably has a lot better sense about timeline than I do. I will tell you frankly, from my own point of view, I don't know how bullish I am, but I feel like it's realistic that we are going to see more and more capable cars. I think many people worry about the last mile problem. Let me just talk about cars for a second. In terms of, are we going to get it so it's safe enough, trustworthy enough, et cetera. But I do think that's unavoidable. What worries me about the IoT is if we let the innovation get too far ahead of any social controls we have, that really help us use these technologies to advance society. And so, in terms of the whole sense about our physical bodies, our physiological, our physiological systems and the way we interact with all of that, I think there are a lot of really challenging issues. And I have no timeline. I'm not sure I'm bullish about it because I think we have to do all of this with the utmost of care. And I think oftentimes, we find an innovation and then we kind of reverse engineer the social stuff. So I would say to be able to do it with full sort of understanding of at least some of the repercussions would be really important. But I wish I had a better answer for that, but I think it's a really tough problem.
So Oliver Alvarado asked, thank you so much for the talk. The main example was self-driving cars from IoT. What other pressing areas and technologies exist that you encountered in your research?
It's funny, and you will all laugh because it's not that I'm particularly excited about cars. But I loved using self-driving cars as an example for an IoT device and system that was a somewhat worked example. We have experience with cars. We have, some sense about cars' usefulness in our society. Frankly, it's much easier to create a talk that people will think is relevant about self-driving cars than about smart toasters, even though I'm sure they're wonderful. But they all have sort of the same issues. And all of our devices that are collecting data, where there's no restrictions on how that data is used, there's no restrictions on how that data can interact with you, and all of that stuff, I think do have the same issues, and they all need to be regulated in one way or another. So in that sense, I think cars are, descriptive of what we're going to be dealing with many other things. Now, I will tell you, I do not have an Alexa. I don't know, David, do you have an Alexa?
I do, but Alexa is inside my Facebook portal.
Yeah.
And I have a couple devices around the house listening at all times.
Yeah, and and David is comfortable with that, but I am not so comfortable with that. And I really feel like until there are more controls on what can be done with the data, how it's done, et cetera, that's really important. Now, in my own class, I teach a class on data and society at RPI, and we've just sort of finished a privacy section where we had 5 different lectures on privacy. And one of the lectures was on differential privacy that Cynthia Dwork at Harvard was very instrumental in creating. and how it's being used in the census. And so there are some really innovative things coming from our community, I think, that are giving us mathematical and technical foundations in order to restrict some of the data that is being collected. And that's sort of one way of going about it. So that's one thing that data scientists can do. But I do think the problems that we have with self-driving cars and other kinds of devices are problems that are common among the IoT devices.
We have time for one last question, and it comes from Zarina Din, who asks and says, Dr. Berman, thanks for the great sharing. From your opinion, how IoT adoption will influence in IS security management in smart city ecosystems?
This is a really great, such a great question. All these questions were great. Thank you so much for asking them. I think that smart cities, offer both this amazingly efficient and convenient and advanced way to deliver goods and services in a city, and they're also, much more intrusive than the regular way we live. Right. And so if somebody comes around and they've got sensors on my garbage can so they know whether to pick up or not, whether it's full enough or not, they also know more about my life than they knew before. If they're sensing where my car is or where my person is or anything like that, the kind of surveillance you need for a smart city, that's more information than they have. And I think each of us has to say, how comfortable are we and what kinds of controls can we put on that information so it's used beneficially? I think smart cities are really an interesting idea, but I think if we don't think through the social and environmental implications of smart city, the ethical implications of smart cities, then I think we do so at our own risk. So, it's like anything else, I think it's in the gray area. How can we make it more positive and less negative? You don't want to throw it all out, but it's very important for, I think, for it to be used to advance us.
So thank you again, Dr. Berman. What a great talk from such a distinguished pioneer in data sciences. And in 2050, I'll hail that self-driving car. I'll come visit you during your ballet lessons, and we'll catch up that way.
My pirouettes will not be better by then, but I keep trying.
So thank you again, and thanks to everyone in Zoom and on YouTube for attending, and I hope you can join us for next week's seminar as well. Thank you, everyone.
Be well, everybody.